Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Saidin Bakr, founder and leader of Bond Life. So, in honor of Computer Science Education Week, we have brought to you a webinar by Ali Alqatari talking about how to apply computer science in your daily life. So, first of all, Ali, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so would you like to present first? Just let me
Of course. Give me 1 second to
take your time.
share my screen. All right, yeah. Here. You guys should be able to see it now.
Yes.
Let me just put this off and then present. All right, so today I'm going to be talking with you guys about computer science in your everyday life and why it's important to brush up on computer science. So first, when you talk about computer science, you need to know what a computer is. And it's really easy to define a computer, actually. A computer is a device that can calculate, store, and process data according to certain inputs. And that definition is an umbrella term because that means that most things that we use in our daily lives are actually computers. And the interesting part about it is that it's made up of many smaller components, such as an ALU, which is an arithmetic and logical unit, which is this picture on the right here, and then RAM, which stands for random access memory, which the green stick in the middle, and then a processor, which one of its forms is the picture you guys see on your right. Using that definition we talked about here, both calculators and smartphones can be considered as computers. However, we all know that smartphones are much better at doing certain computations than calculators. It's because they have many more arithmetic and logical units so that they're able to do calculations that are much more rigorous than a calculator. They also have many times the processors. I don't think most calculators you use have any processors. They just use arithmetic logical units and RAM to give you certain output. But you can see by increasing the amount of memory, the amount of operands that a certain computer can do and processors, which is how much load it can process at a certain time, you can achieve computers that can do computation that's much more rigorous than other types of computers. But we need to understand that computer science is more than programming. This is a misconception that a lot of people have, especially when they go into college to study computer science. They think, oh, I'm going to study computer science. I'm going to learn Python. I'm going to learn Java. I'm going to learn C++. And all they're going to be learning is computer science or programming, I should say. See, even I made that mistake. But computer science is actually a lot more math than programming. It's because computer science is a theory of computing, and the theory of computing requires a lot of math, because if we look at the slide we discussed previously, the computers are basically devices that are really, really, really good at doing math. And so being able to utilize computers in the best way possible requires understanding math or having a deep understanding at math, which is why if you're thinking of taking computer science as a major in university, you will need to tolerate taking a lot of math at the very least. It will also help you if you enjoy learning about math, because then you excel while taking computer science. On the other hand, we have coding, which is what most people think of when we say computer science, and that's just the implementation of the theory of computing. And so, as many of you know, I think most people in this webinar have taken at least one coding course. When you're given a problem and you have to implement it using code, all you're doing is translating translating the solution from that problem in human terms to computer terms. Now, doing that takes some effort because computers are actually very stupid. They're only going to be able to do a certain task if you explain it to them in a very simple way. It's like talking to a toddler or talking to a child. They won't be able to understand a complex language, so you have to explain it to them in simple terms so that then they're able to do it. But can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I thought I left for a second. Yeah. I was saying that the important thing is, even if it takes a lot of simplification for us to get computers to understand what we want them to do, which is what we do when we use coding, simplifying our instructions is really useful because we're able to save so much time on computing. I'm pretty sure if you guys try to solve, you guys could solve the problems given to you by your computer science teacher, by hand, or try solving them without using any functions, but that would take such a long amount of time, and you would be so inefficient at it that it's just not worth it. And so we can move on to the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about it by now. It's a certain buzzword. So a lot of people would just say Internet of Things to sound smart, but the Internet of Things is really simple. It's basically how objects will speak to each other. So an example of that would be if you wanted to go back home, but you wanted your AC to be on. What we would do 10 years ago is we would leave the AC on so that when we come back, our house wouldn't be hot. But then that would cost a lot of money, because that would run up your electricity bill. However, what you can do now is, as you're going back home, you open up your phone and you just press on a button, and then your AC just opens up, which is really magical if you ask me. But that happens with the Internet of Things. Your phone sends a signal, the signal gets sent to the AC picks up the signal and then decodes that signal from whatever it is into, okay, I just need to open myself at a certain temperature and blow at this certain angle and make sure the air I spit out is at this percentage of humidity and all of that. And if there's a timer, oh, I should close after this amount of time and then open up this amount of time. It's very complex, very beautiful, but there is a very big caveat when it comes to the Internet of Things. It allows you for more control of your surroundings. You can control your AC, your fridge, your TV, even your car. Even your car is going to be able to operate using Internet of Things. Some cars have their keys put on the phones of their owners. Other cars allow you to control the car from your phone, or have it to where it will park somewhere, all from your phone. And that happens due to the Internet of Things. However, this comes at the cost of security, because if someone's able to hack into your phone, then they're able to hack into your house. Right now, if someone hacks into your phone, it's your phone mostly, and then that counts as inside your phone. However, once the Internet of Things becomes mainstream and is truly in every home, then there's a very, very big security flaw in most homes, because if a breach happens to anyone's phone, then that means your entire house can be stolen. Someone could hack into your phone and lock you out of your own house while you're at work, or even worse, take control of your car and force it to drive somewhere. So I don't mean to get too dark with this, but this is a very big debate in the industry about how can we get all the benefits from bigger control while minimizing the risk of security breaches. And for that, we're going to need a lot of IT security members, or people that are in cybersecurity, which is one career path that comes from computer science. The good thing about computer science is that it's the most fluid major when it comes to career options out of university. As a computer scientist, you're going to be learning computer science, you're going to be taking a lot of math, you're going to be taking a bunch of science as well. And so that makes you very well-rounded as a student. Most computer science majors end up minoring or even double majoring in another major or another subject. So that makes them even even better potential employees for certain employers. And so most companies these days are trying to scoop up any computer science graduate because they know that they have the rigor it takes to survive the climate of their companies. However, this also comes with another, caveat, which is that computer science is easy to self-learn, especially when it comes to programming. And so what ends up happening is a lot of people that don't have college degrees end up in positions such as web development or software engineering because those are code heavy. Those are code heavy professions, and for you don't need a traditional college experience for coding. And most of it can be self-taught online because there are a lot of resources on it. And as such, it creates a dilemma where if you go into university as a computer scientist, you will most likely be guaranteed a job. However, some employers are moving the route of taking computer scientists slash programmers that are not taught or self-taught or not taught by a college, because that just saves them more money since they can pay them less since they aren't in college. However, you shouldn't worry about that too much. Computers, you don't have to work in the major that you studied in college, and most of the times you don't end up working the major you studied in college, or you end up pivoting out of that major in your professional career. So in the long run, it doesn't matter. However, it's important to know which titles you can pursue as a computer scientist and whether or not you can pursue them. These titles can include web developer and software engineer, as I said before, and also IT security member. IT security member especially is in high demand in our days, and it will only keep going up because of the future of computer science. And so in the future of computer science, there are three topics I want to focus on. The computer science's future is endless. I mean, we all use computers these days. You can probably look at your phone and you realize you spend more time on your phone than time without it, which is kind of sad, but that's an issue for another day. And so the first subject I want to touch on in regards to the future of computer science is supercomputing. Supercomputing has increased in popularity as demand for more processing power has emerged. And you can see on the left of the presentation, this is a supercomputer, and a supercomputer is just a fancy way of saying a bunch of computers stacked up on each other that all process the same input. But here's the thing, you're going to build a supercomputer because the input you give it is very large or very complex. It's the most powerful form of computing we have, which basically means supercomputers are the best thing on earth that can do math. However, we've now achieved something even more powerful than that as we've delved into the field of as we delve into the quantum field, and that's quantum computing. Quantum computing will define new computer science theory. What I mean by that is because I should explain why quantum computing will do that. Quantum computing depends on quantum physics to achieve certain computing goals, such as adding numbers, multiplying them, shifting them, saving them in memory. And because quantum quite literally breaks the physics we know, then that computing also breaks the computer science theory we know. And one very powerful example of that is passwords. So if you were to give a supercomputer the task of trying to brute force its way into a certain account, which basically means trying every single combination for a password until one of them opens up, it would, no matter which supercomputer it is, if the password sequence is long enough, so say about 10 letters, and it could be anything in a keyboard. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but that is extremely large, even for supercomputers, where it would take them days or maybe even weeks, sometimes depending on what the length of the password is. However, for quantum computers, they'll be able to break in they'll be able to break most passwords and most encryption. Encryption is also a bunch of fancy math, and so it relieves a really big, cybersecurity hole when it comes to when quantum computing will become mainstream. And it's an issue that computer scientists are still debating today, because they're trying to see which solutions will be most efficient when it comes to stopping quantum computing from brute forcing its way into the passwords of all people. I mean, I'm pretty sure no one here wants this phone to be hacked, right? So we all need to find a way to not allow quantum computing to be able to break into all of our personal data. And what that way will most likely be is another form of encryption that is too powerful for even for quantum computing to handle or to brute force its way through. With that being said, we need to focus on the present day a bit more, and by far the most I should say the most advanced form of modern day computing we have is cyber warfare. It's already being used by governments around the world. It's being used in many forms, not just one. So when I see cyber warfare, I'm pretty sure most of you are thinking of, hacking into people's accounts and stealing all their money and stuff. And that is that's one form that's very powerful. Other ways include, operating a drone remotely. So let's say the United States has a war somewhere else around the world. Instead of manning pilots into that area, they could just operate their planes from the soil of the United States, which would not only save lives and save costs, but it would allow it to launch more aggressive attacks, since it wouldn't have to care about the lives of the pilots inside the plane. And vice versa. Other countries can start doing that, which means that there will be a rise in the aggressiveness, I should say, of warfare, as it depends on less and less human input. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen how cyber/advanced warfare can take form in a lot of what do you call it, video games. For example, Call of Duty has a bunch of advanced there's a game called Advanced Warfare, but it also has multiple games that have their focus on advanced warfare. Halo is, not realistic, but it still shows it still tries to depict a certain future where cyber warfare is the norm, or where warfare is enhanced and developed. And so my point with that is, I think most of you guys are familiar with cyber warfare. However, most of it is just, sitting on your computer all day and typing things up so that people that type things up in another part of the world can't get into your data. And with that being said, this is all I had to present to you guys. I wanted to give you guys some letterheads on computer science. Computer science is a very large and complex field. I don't think I would be able to explain it to you guys, even if I had an entire day, and I don't think anyone else would be able to. It's a topic that requires a lot of time and a lot of focus to understand, but I wanted to give you guys some letterheads, some cool things like quantum computing, supercomputing, career paths, so that you guys can pick up at least one thing you thought might be interesting in today's presentation and go Google it yourself and learn more about it. And who knows, if you end up not liking computer science, then at least you research your way into that. But if you end up, liking something that I talked about today, then that would be, I think I would be glad by that, because I would be glad, but I think you would also be, you guys would also care about that more because you found something you're interested in. But with that being said, I'll leave the floor open to any questions.
Okay, so we'll move on to Q&As. So if anyone has any questions, please write them down in the chat. Okay, so we have our first question from RA. So it says, what are you most interested in out of all the choices there, or out of?
So I'm an electrical engineer. That's what I studied in college. Electrical engineers have to, as electrical engineers, we need to understand how the, what do you call it, the components of a computer work. So when I talked about the arithmetic and logical units, here I'll open up the slides for you guys again, so that's easier to see. So when I talked about the ALU units and when I talked about RAM and microprocessors, um, that's what I need to understand, and that's what I care about the most, um, because being able to make these processes go more efficiently will not only allow our future computing to be better, but it will also allow our computing today to operate that much efficiently. So if you guys were to think of a computer as a person, the RAM would be memory, which is where you store things. The processor would be the brain, which is what understands and is able to connect whatever input is in. And then this is kind of like your senses. It gets certain input and then it does certain things to it so that it can go into the brain of your computer in a way that your brain understands. So it's kind of like if your eyes, get a picture of something and they translate them into certain electrical impulses that your brain can then decode into the actual picture you're seeing. It's the same thing here. These units get input and then they do certain things with them depending on what you want from the computer. And then they put them into the computer. The computer most likely will put this into memory so you can access it later. And then it can take what it already has in memory and use it with a certain input. And then it can create a whole bunch of, different computing possibilities. So that's what I'm most interested in, is what, the insides of a computer and how they work and how we can make them better today. I will say though, quantum computing interests me a lot as well, because quantum computing quite literally breaks most computer science theory we know of today. And so why that excites me is I want to see how we, as humans, develop new ways to harness all the good that comes with quantum computing without, falling victim to the bad of it, or allowing people that have bad intentions to get their way when it comes to quantum computing. I'm interested in seeing the future of quantum computing as well. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. It's a question from Jasser. So, what majors pair well with the CS major?
What majors pay well with a CS major? I mean, that question is subjective because it depends on which career path you're talking about. So, let's say if you want to be an IT security member within a bank, then finance would make more sense. You can still work in that very same bank as an IT security member. But if you were to get a math major, for example, along with a CS major, then you would be paid less because you would be deemed as having less expertise for that position. So it depends on which position you're applying to. But generally speaking, a computer scientists, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but most computer scientists that I'm with in university have a focus on finance/economics, or actually double majoring in that, because that allows them to go into most STEM fields, but then it also allows them to go into jobs that require a background in economics or a background in business. So for example, a bank, as I told you, but especially today, because a lot of banking is just numbers on a computer, you're more likely to see more people that have taken CS in working in a bank than people that have taken a finance or economic theory or business management in a bank. Of course, they will be taught that once they go into the bank, However, in terms of what their titles are from university, a lot of banks do have more computer scientists working in them. But if to answer your question, I would say, anything that does with finance slash business, economics, math majors as well, because computer science is a fancy way of saying applied math, and that taking a math major in addition to that is also very helpful. There is an unpopular route, although it's not non-mainstream, if you understand what I'm saying, but it's not popular because it's a lot of work. But there are a lot of computer science slash electrical engineering majors, so the double major in computer science and electrical engineering, partly because computer science and electrical engineering have some common ground, which is this what a computer is. But once you get into especially your junior and your senior years, your third and fourth years, they start branching off into two totally different fields. And so even if the potential for earning is very high, the stress you're going to be putting yourself in those next 2 to 3 years is not worth it. And oftentimes you're going to burn out and experience all sorts of things no one should experience. So you're going to be put under tremendous amounts of pressure. But for the people that can handle it, they almost always do end up in that route, just because they're two majors that combine so much rigor, and so employers anywhere would drool over such a combination. But to answer your question, I would say most commonly finance, econ, then math, then some sort of engineering, which is most likely electrical engineering.
Okay, so moving on to the next question from Leon. So can you talk about the main differences between CS and majoring software engineer?
Okay, so a software engineer is just a software engineer. There are three types of software engineers, I should say. First, there's a front end software engineer, a back end software engineer, and then a full stack software engineer. A front end software engineer deals with what users can see in a website, which is what software engineers do. They make sure that websites look and function the way they should. Back end software engineers make sure that whatever processes a website goes through or takes, for example, when it takes data from users, to make sure that it gets it to the right place, it doesn't just randomly forget about it, make sure that it gives out the correct audio to not audio, correct information to its users, and make sure that everything is running smoothly for the user. And then a full stack software engineer takes care of everything about a website, including where its servers go to. So for example, where in the world do we store this website? Because you're going to need to host the site on a server, and a server is basically a supercomputer, but with a lot of memory, so I can store the things on a website. So you have three options as a software engineer. The difference between that and computer science is that software engineers it's just a fancy word of saying a super coder, because they do a ridiculous amount of coding, whereas a computer scientist is an umbrella term, because there are many types of different computer scientists. You could be a computer scientist that's developing theory on computer science. You could be a computer scientist that's focused on AI. You could be a computer scientist that's focused on coding / programming, in which case you're most likely going to have some experience in being a software engineer. There are also computer scientists that are concerned with the hardware of the computer. They're more likely to be called computer engineers, but they can be computer scientists with focus on hardware. It doesn't always have to be software. So I hope that answers your question. Where software developer is just a fancy way of saying a coder, whereas a computer scientist is an umbrella term. So it depends on which kind of computer scientist you're talking about.
Okay, so the next question is coming from Shahid. Shahad is asking about the salaries in computer science.
Salaries of computer science. It also depends on your position. I understand that a lot of questions, a lot of answers I'm giving to you guys is it depends, and so I'm not being 100% concise, but that's the reality of it. It depends on what type of position you get as a computer scientist, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but from as an average, computer scientists do get compensated, uh, pretty generously, especially because they're in high demand. And so, for employers to ensure that they snag up a computer scientist, they usually cave in and give really high pay. There's also another reason for that. It's because computer scientists are more likely to be able to pivot into other positions than other majors, except electrical engineering, because we're that good. But anyways, um, yeah, so it depends on what type of position you secure as a computer scientist. So a software engineer would be compensated differently than would someone working in a team that's researching AI, than would someone that's working in cybersecurity. I will say that cybersecurity and what's it called, hedge fund, managing a hedge fund, and are the two that pay the most. And then you might be thinking, well, what does managing a hedge fund have to do with computer science? What I mean by that is being able to scrunch up all the numbers for the hedge fund, and then giving it to them and telling them what they need to do and where they need to do it and at what time zone they need to do it, because those are all things that hedge funds care about. And so I would say those two things or those two paths in particular are the ones that will probably pay you the most in computer science. But in terms of computer science as a general, I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I do know it's a high number, especially if you come straight out of college. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so the next question says, is studying computer science difficult?
Yeah, because it's easier than some majors. So, for example, I would say studying for computer science is easier than studying for electrical engineering. I might be biased here, but I say this because studying computer science is very hard because a lot of it is math. And so, as I'm sure you guys know, not everyone is just a math whiz. Uh, most people are actually not, most people are not on the level of math needed to excel in computer science. And so what that means is you have to get yourself to that level. And so the process of doing that is rigorous. And then, other than the math aspect of it, you also have to understand coding. And I'm sure most of the people here in this meeting have some experience with coding. Coding for the first time is literally like learning a new language for the first time. There are a lot of struggles, a lot of things you need to manage, a lot of things you need to remember, a lot of new laws you need to understand. Um, what's it called? It's fairly difficult. I will say it is doable. You just have to invest a lot of time, which is what you need to do for most things in life. But it's hard but doable, if that answers your question. I will say one thing though. Yeah, so excuse me for interrupting, but I will say one thing is, if you're thinking of studying computer science, but then you're backing out because you might have heard me say it's difficult, don't, for two reasons. Firstly, if you're interested in computer science, then I would recommend you take it no matter what, because it's a subject you're interested in, which means that when you face adversity while studying or while learning about it, you'll be able to overcome it because you care about the topic. And then the other reason is because you're going to realize once you get into college that no matter what major you take, it's going to be difficult because of the amount of work you guys need to do, and also the type of work you guys need to do. So for most majors, like 99.9% of majors available to a student in a university, they're going to have a level of rigor, or a level of work that you guys will have to do no matter what. So if you guys just end up choosing the easiest major and then you end up realizing that, hey, this is still a lot of work, then not only are you going to have to put in a lot of work, it's going to be for a major you don't enjoy learning about. And so you will experience burnout on a much faster pace than most people will, because what you're learning you don't care about. If you feel like you're wasting your time, even though you're studying, like even if you can muster up enough time to study for that subject, if you don't care about it, you're gonna feel that you're wasting your time deep inside, and this is going to create feelings of misery. And so, yeah, I got a bit too dark there, but I wanted to make sure that I got the point across. Where yes, it's difficult, but if you think that that's where your future lies, or if you're interested in the subject, then by all means take it, because there's going to be difficulty in anything you study. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so moving on to the next question from Mohsen. So, don't you think the CS industry is overcrowded?
Yeah. So there's also an obvious caveat here, which is I'm only a student. So as much as I know, I've only been around the CS industry for maybe even less than 2 years now. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. But with that being said, yes, there is an issue of overcrowdedness in the CS industry. However, this is not a long-term problem for the industry, because the industry has high turnover due to the stress of the jobs you work. A lot of people tend to pivot outside of CS, and it's not because they want to, it's just the nature of working jobs. You're more likely to work in more than one industry, which means work in more than one thing. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm statistically likely to start a job as an electrical engineer, but then pivot into something completely differently, and then pivot into something that's completely different than that, and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that I hate electrical engineering, but that's just the nature of a job. So I might be offered a job as an accountant, or as an analyst, or as a hedge fund manager, and if the pay is better, if it if it meets the criteria I think of as improving my success, maybe it gives me a better position, then I will go to the job, and so will most people. So what that means is all that means on paper is that I left a job in electrical engineering to go to a job that does not require electrical engineering, and so that's turnover there. So that happens in the CS industry a lot. And also there's a lot of capacity for jobs that require computer science majors. I would argue that the overcrowdedness that comes in the CS industry is not because millions of CS students graduate every year. It's because a lot of candidates for CS positions or software engineering positions end up or are there with no college degree, which means you can't estimate how many people there will be next year, which means the market can't develop enough amount of positions for those people, because they just pop out of nowhere. They learn things on their own, and then they just apply for jobs. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm just saying it in the way that it really happens. And because these people know as much about computer science as the college graduates, then there's no difference between them when it comes to applying for the position, because they're going to be doing the same thing and they both know how to do it. Actually, a lot of companies end up preferring what do you call it? Those CS students that aren't in universities, because they don't have that piece of paper, which is a diploma, which means that they can get away with paying them less because they're quote unquote less qualified, which saves money for the company, even though they're going to be doing the same job. And that works for the person that is without a college degree, because they did this because they want a job. If you teach yourself about an entire industry, or at least some part of it, without taking a college degree, then you appear to be very dedicated into a career, into that path. And so any start for you is good, even if it doesn't pay as much. So to answer your question, yes, I think there is an issue of overcrowdedness in the CS industry, but I don't think that it's an issue that is going to affect the industry in the long term because of the high turnover rate and the large capacity of employment in the industry. I would honestly argue that there is more of an issue of CS overcrowdedness in universities. There's this joke in my university where, when you meet someone, you're like, hi, what's your name? CS major? Because they're statistically more likely to answer yes than no. So, and that's the case for most universities. I should say most universities that offer STEM courses. But yeah, again, to answer your question, there is overcrowdedness in the CS industry, but I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, so moving on, we have a question saying, so what do I do to prepare to study computer science in university?
Great question, actually. All of these are great questions, but this one I can, answer precisely. Um, to study computer science in university, I would say brush up on your math. Make sure you're good at all the math you need to be good at in high school, because trust me when I say this, just because your high school says you're good at math doesn't mean you're actually good at that math. And I don't mean to offend anyone by saying this, but when you get into university, especially your first year, if you don't take any foundation year or any year to prep you for university, so if you come in straight out of high school, you're going to realize that school makes things a lot more easier than they actually are, whereas college gives it to you how it is. And so I would recommend how that relates in terms of computer science is, because computer science is a lot of math. You're going to end up taking a lot of math courses. You're going to end up taking Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3. You're also going to have to take linear algebra, and you're going to have to take something called discrete math, which is basically, I don't know if you guys remember taking maths in the 8th or 9th grade, and then your teacher would force you to write proofs for all the solutions. Discrete math is like that, but on a much higher scale. And so that's just one subject we're talking about here. You're going to have to cover at least 5 different math courses. And that's not talking about which path you get into in computer science, because once you get to university, your university is going to tell you, okay, do you want a general computer science degree, or do you want your computer science degree to have a certain focus or focus on a certain topic? So as I said, for example, cybersecurity, software engineering, web development. If you choose any of these focuses, you're going to have to take additional math courses for that certain focus. And so I would, by far, the first thing I would recommend is brush up on your math. Second thing I would say is learn at least one programming language before you get into university, either Python or Java, preferably Java, because as you move on to more rigorous computer science courses that use lower and lower languages that are lower and lower level, which means languages that are closer to zeros and ones than they are to human speech, then you'll see that they tend to follow laws that are taught or that are followed by Java and not by Python. And I'm not saying that Java is better than Python. I'm just saying that for computer scientists, um, Java's laws are applicable to more programming languages than Python's, or its syntax, I should say. Java syntax will allow you to be more familiar with other languages than Python, but I would still recommend learning them both. So I would recommend firstly learning all the math you need to learn in high school and making sure you're good at it. And then I would say learn at least one programming language before getting into university, preferably both Python and Java. If you can, then one of them is fine. Java might be a tad bit better, but either Java or Python work. They're going to teach you the basics of how to think like a computer scientist and how to implement solutions like a computer scientist would do. And it would help you. It will help you in your. It will help you in your college endeavors, because if you come into college knowing how to code in Java and Python, then when you take that Java or Python course, it'll make it easier for you, which will allow you to free up time to study on more rigorous languages. The languages you might take later on, such as C++, maybe C sharp. Some of you guys might even be taking, cybersecurity, which requires knowledge of low-level languages. So like very close to binary. And then if some of you are decide to become computer engineers or decide to focus on the hardware of computers, then you guys will need to learn how to code in low-level languages, which is basically telling each part of the computer what to do. It's called assembly language, or one of those languages is called MIPS, which is something I'm taking right now. You're going to have to know what to tell each individual register, which is like each individual piece of memory, and each individual processor what to do and when to do it and where to send it to. And so the sooner you're able to learn Java, the easier, or Java or Python, the more prepared you'll be to learn those languages you need to learn to be able to go into the industry. And so, again, it took quite some time to answer your question, but I would say make sure you're good at the math that you learn in high school, and then make sure you learn at least one programming language, either Java or Python.
Okay, so moving on to the last question of today's webinar. So do you see an increasing difficulty to understand all these new electronics and devices that are popping up, or even just in general? And also, what's your advice on at least starting to learn about electronics?
So electronics is actually related to electrical engineering, which is my major. So that made me smile a bit. But I would say there is an increase in difficulty in understanding all these new electronics. So I think what you're referring to here, here, let me share my screen again. I think what you're referring to is this is a quantum computer, or at least one form of a quantum computer. As you guys can see, this looks very different than this. This is just a bunch of computers stacked up together. You can think of this as getting a motherboard for a PC and just putting them on top of each other so that they're able to compute something much more rigorously. This is just something else. I can't even describe this, because this requires knowledge of quantum physics. And so if you don't know, this will literally just fly over your head. And this also flies through my head because I don't know much about quantum and quantum physics. But of course, there will be an increased level of difficulty in understanding this. It's like if we went back 100 years and tried to explain to someone what a computer is today, they wouldn't be able to understand it. It's the same thing now, but slowly but surely we're getting to understand quantum physics, which means we're able to explain quantum computing more easily, and we're able to know how to use quantum computing. And so, yes, there is an increased difficulty in understanding all these new electronics that are popping up, but that's good. The increase in difficulty is because there's going to be an increase in productivity, and so what precedes that is an increase in the difficulty, which once you're able to answer that, then you'll be able to harness all the good of your newfound electronics and devices. And this also relates to what I said about the Internet of Things. Once we can push the solution of having everything be centralized without it being so easy to breach security of the house or seize control of everything in the house from one phone. We were able to push the Internet of Things into to be much more mainstream. I'm pretty sure you guys know, most people here know at least one person that one person that has a house where they can control the temperature of their fridge and they can open the TV at certain times, they can control their AC, they can even control their beds. One of my friends has his has his bed controlled by his phone. But with that being said, there is an increased difficulty, but that's good. What's my advice on at least starting to learn about electronics? My advice, I don't know, this is some vanilla advice, but then I'll get into something more specific. I would say learn and practice. So just read about it as much as you can. Practice some problems that you might need to practice when you come into practice the problems you need to practice to understand that topic. I would say for electronics, so most electronics employ some things called logic gates. And to understand logic gates, you need to understand something called Boolean algebra. And so I would say learn about Boolean algebra, because not only will it help you understand electronics, it will also help you to understand computing, because all computers do is just fancy Boolean algebra. So yeah, and Boolean algebra is not as difficult as it sounds. It's basically math that involves true and false. And so we know that true and false is like only two outcomes, right? Either true or false. So because we know our math can only get two outcomes, we can no matter how difficult our problem seems to be, then our solution we know will only be either true or false, which is reassuring in a way, because you know that you're either going to get one thing or the other. And if you're wrong, then it means that the other solution is true. But yeah, I would say learn about Boolean algebra and practice Boolean algebra if you want to start to learn about electronics. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so seeing that there aren't any more questions, we'll be wrapping up. We'll be wrapping up today's webinar. I'd like to thank you, Eddie, for presenting. It's very delightful having you, and inshallah, this webinar will be saved, and it's been recording, and you'll find the recording in our Instagram. Be sure to follow us at Balanced Life for more webinars, and also if you have any more questions, you can also DM us in our account, and we'll be happy to answer.
Inshallah. Thank you guys for hosting me. مؤيد الله يعافيك يا مؤيد. تسلم على الكلام الحلو. And thank you guys for listening to my presentation and asking me amazing questions, honestly. الله يعافيك أحمد. Thank you guys.